Welcome back to our continuing journey through Mohammed Ali Amir-Moezzi's groundbreaking work, The Divine Guide in Early Shi'ism. We're still on chapter 1, and today we're diving into the section that really gets to the heart of what makes Shia Islam distinctive: the nature and authority of the Imami traditions. If you've been following our series, you'll remember we've been exploring how early Shi'ism developed its unique theological framework. Today's discussion builds on that foundation by examining how the traditions, the Hadith, function within Imami thought and why they're so fundamentally different from what we see in Sunni Islam. Let's start with some terminology. When Amir-Moezzi talks about traditions, he's referring to several Arabic terms that the early text used interchangeably: Sunnah, Hadith, Khabar, Athar, and Riwaya. Now, here's what makes this immediately distinctive from Sunni Islam. These traditions include not just sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, but also those of his daughter Fatima and all the 12 Imams. Together, these 14 figures are also known as the Masoom, the Impeccables, those protected from error and sin. This is crucial to understand. So while Sunni Muslims limit authoritative traditions to the Prophet alone, Shia Muslims recognize a continuing chain of divine guidance through the Imams. This isn't just a minor theological difference. It fundamentally reshapes how religious authority functions in Shia Islam. Now, Amir-Moezzi makes a brilliant observation that really helps us understand the complexity of Shia literature. He identifies two distinct categories of Imamite traditions, and the difference between them is striking. First, we have the juridical traditions. These deal with Islamic law, the practical matters of worship and daily life. You'll find these in major compilations like Al-Kulaini's Kafi, especially in the Furu section, or in Ibn Babawayh's Kitab Man La Yazarul Faqih. And there's also Al-Tusi's work, the Tahdibul Akam, and its summary, Al-Istibsar. Here's what's fascinating, and Amir-Moezzi is absolutely right to point this out. These juridical traditions look remarkably similar to their Sunni counterparts. The differences in Islamic law, and there are differences between Shia and Sunni schools, but they're not actually that significant. In fact, the variations between Shia law and Sunni law are often no greater than the differences you'd find between the four major Sunni schools themselves. The Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and the Hanbali schools. This might surprise some listeners who assume that the Sunni-Shia divide creates a completely different legal system. But as scholars like Devin Stewart have also noted in his work on Shia legal theory, the fundamentals of worship, contracts, family law, they're largely the same across both traditions. But then we come to the second category, the doctrinal or the dogmatic traditions. And here, as Amir-Moezzi beautifully expresses it, we enter into entirely different territory. He notes that anyone familiar with Sunni Hadith literature will feel a sense of disorientation when approaching these Imamite doctrinal traditions. And he's absolutely right, because these traditions don't just differ in content, they differ in their entire worldview. While juridical traditions might tell you how to pray or fast, doctrinal traditions explore the cosmic role of the Imams, their supernatural knowledge, their function as intermediaries between the divine and the human realms. And of course, because the Sunni school doesn't subscribe to the imamat of the 12 imams, they obviously lack these doctrinal hadith in their collections. And this is where we find what Amir-Moezzi calls the truly original characteristics of the doctrine. And at the center of all is imamology, the word coined by Amir-Moezzi, the theology of the imamat. Without understanding imamology, he argues, you cannot adequately study any other aspect of Shia theology, whether it's the nature of God, prophethood, or eschatology. Everything revolves around the Imam. Let me share something profound from the text. According to the early writings, the Imams taught that only two authorities exist for the faithful, the Qur'an and the Hadith. These are absolute and complementary. Together, they contain answers to everything, from mundane daily life matters to cosmic metaphysical questions. Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, the sixth Imam, alayhi salam, stated, there is nothing with which a verse of the Quran or a tradition does not deal. Think about the comprehensiveness of this claim. Every thought, every word, every deed should be grounded in these two sources. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Quran that the Imams speak of isn't necessarily the Quran as it exists in the Mus'haf today. Amir-Moezzi hints at something he'll explore later in much more detail, the concept of an integral version of the Quran withheld by the Imams. This touches on complex discussions in early Shia thought about the completeness of the current Quranic text, something that the early scholars have explored extensively in their research. The relationship between these two sources is beautifully articulated in the traditions. The Hadith don't replace or supersede the Quran. They explain and clarify what the Quran already contains. As Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam said, everything should lead back to the Quran and the tradition, the Sunnah. And crucially, a hadith that contradicts Kitab Allah is nothing more than a well-disguised lie. Who has the authority to interpret the Quran? In early Shi'ism, this privilege belongs exclusively to two categories of individuals: the Prophet, in his function as the messenger of the divine word, and the Imam, as the initiated and divinely inspired exegete of this word, explainer of this word, meaning that they alone possess the divinely inspired knowledge to unlock the meanings of the Quran. This exclusive authority is emphasized in a striking statement attributed to Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says the Quran contains the knowledge of the past and that of the future up to the day of resurrection. It serves as your arbiter, and it clarifies there where you may stray. Ask me for the signs of the Quran, and I shall teach it to you. Similarly, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam declared, the Prophet, God's messenger, engendered me, and I contain the knowledge of the Quran, the book that contains the beginning of creation as well as all that will take place up to the day of resurrection. It contains the account of the events of the heavens and earth, those of paradise and hell, those of the past and of the future. And I know all of this as clearly as if I saw it written on the palm of my hand. Yes, God has put a clear explanation of all things in the Quran. These statements reveal the extraordinary claim that the Imams possessed complete knowledge of the Quran, not just its apparent meanings, but its hidden dimensions that encompass all knowledge of creation from beginning to end. This isn't just scholarly knowledge acquired through study. It's divinely bestowed understanding. The Imams possess innate knowledge that comes from their special relationship with the divine. Now we come to one of the most profound and distinctive aspects of early Shi'ism. The sayings of the Imams are considered just as sacred as those of the Prophet. In fact, they are even regarded as holy, as sacred, and as important as the words of God Himself. This extraordinary claim is explicitly expressed in a tradition attributed to Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, which scholars have emphasized for its importance. He says, "My speech is identical to that of my father. His speech is identical to that of my grandfather. That of my grandfather identical to his father, Al-Hussein. His identical to that of Al-Hassan. His identical to that of the Prince of Believers, Amir al-Mu'minin, that is the first Imam, Imam Ali alayhi salam. And his identical to that of the Prophet. And his identical to the Word of God." This tradition establishes an unbroken chain of divine authority from God through the Prophet to each successive Imam. The speech of each Imam is identical to that of his predecessor, all the way back to the Prophet, whose speech is identical to the Word of God. This creates a divine continuity that's central to Shiite theology. This tradition also highlights another crucial doctrine, the unity of the teachings of the Imams. Their teachings constitute an indissoluble whole that must be understood in an integral manner. The doctrines of the Imams form a coherent system that must be embraced in its entirety. We need to appreciate just how revolutionary this understanding of tradition was in the context of early Islam. While Sunni Islam was developing a methodology of hadith criticism based on evaluating chains of narrators, early Shi'ism was establishing a doctrine where the words of the Imams carried intrinsic divine authority. This created two fundamentally different approaches to access religious knowledge. In Sunni Islam, authority gradually shifted to the scholarly class who developed the sciences of hadith criticism, usul al-fiqh, and other jurisprudential subjects. Whereas in early Shi'ism, authority remained concentrated in the divine persons of the Imams, whose words carried inherent truth value regardless of chains of transmission. What Amir-Moezzi helps us understand is that these differences weren't merely political or historical accidents. They reflected profound theological differences about the nature of religious authority and divine guidance. What does all this mean for Shiite believers? First, it means that the authority of the Imam's words is absolute, on par with divine revelation itself. When an Imam speaks, it's as if God is speaking. Second, it establishes a framework for religious knowledge that's hierarchical and initiatory rather than democratic. True understanding of religion comes through the Imams, who serve as the exclusive channels of divine knowledge. And third, it creates a religious worldview that's comprehensive and integrated, where the teachings of all the 14 Impeccables, the 14 Masumin, form a single coherent body of sacred knowledge. This creates a fundamentally different religious epistemology, a different way of knowing religious truth. It's not just about interpreting texts, it's about accessing the continuing guidance that flows through the Imams. What Amir-Moezzi is showing us here has massive implications for how religious authority functions in Shi'ism. Unlike Sunni Islam, where religious scholars derive authority from their knowledge of texts and methodologies, in Shi'ism, ultimate authority flows from the Imams themselves. Modern Shia scholars have attempted to appropriate this authority through claims of representing the hidden Imam. This claim is fundamentally flawed and contradicts the explicit teachings about the uniqueness of the Imams. As we have seen, the traditions establish that only the 12 Imams possess this special status. And any attempt to extend this circle effectively dilutes the very concept that makes Imamism distinctive from the Sunni school. The practical effect of positioning themselves as representatives of the Imam also creates a dangerous illusion of infallibility. This leads to a profound spiritual and practical confusion where scholarly opinions become virtually indistinguishable from divine guidance in the minds of believers. More troublingly, it shifts the believer's relationship from a direct spiritual connection with the Imam to dependency on human intermediaries, fallible intermediaries. Conclusion. What we've explored today really gets to the heart of what makes Shia Islam distinctive. Amir-Moezzi has shown us that while Shia juridical traditions might look similar to Sunni ones, the doctrinal traditions reveal a completely different religious universe, one where the Imam stands at the center of everything, where religious knowledge flows through a chain of divinely guided figures, and where the words of the Imams carry the same weight as divine revelation itself. And this isn't just theological speculation. This shapes how millions of Shia Muslims should understand their faith, practice their religion, and relate to religious authority. The traditions aren't just historical artifacts, they are living sources of guidance that continue to shape Shia thought and practice today. Next time, we'll continue our journey through Amir-Moezzi's work, exploring how these concepts of tradition and authority relate to other aspects of early Shia thought. Until then, I encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed, how different models of religious authority create different religious worlds, and how the figure of the Imam transforms everything it touches in Shia Islam. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the Divine Guide. Until next time, Ma'as salam.